Agnosticism. Despite its relatively short history of about a century and a half, agnosticism is today a philosophical view that has become almost as widespread as atheism. It is therefore important to analyze agnosticism philosophically, epistemologically, sociologically, and psychologically. The philosophical study of agnosticism covers a wide range of topics. We must also define it, examine its history, identify its types, and differentiate it from atheism. Furthermore, we must address the problematic issues that arise from an epistemological standpoint, such as its philosophical foundations and the debate surrounding them. However, this account must introduce agnosticism and present and discuss its epistemological foundations. We will therefore focus on defining agnosticism, analyzing its history, examining its types, and exploring the differences between it and atheism as a philosophical attitude. Agnosticism is a widely held philosophical attitude in today's world among people who distance themselves from religion and God, along with atheism. Some people even consider those who identify as agnostics to be atheists. The evidence clearly shows that more professors identify as atheists than those who do not. A study conducted in 2006 on the religious beliefs of university and college professors in the United States revealed that 10% of professors identified as atheists. We can confirm that 13% of respondents defined themselves as agnostic. It is time to subject agnosticism, which is so influential and widespread in the world, to the same rigorous philosophical scrutiny as it already receives from psychologists. The philosophical study of agnosticism covers a wide range of topics. These include topics such as its definition, history, types, and differences from atheism, as well as its philosophical foundations and their discussion. We must also address the problematic issues that need to be addressed epistemologically. However, it is crucial to introduce agnosticism and present and discuss its epistemological underpinnings. We will therefore focus on the epistemological analysis of agnosticism and its definition here, with a view to addressing its questioning in another narrative. We will focus on the history and types of agnosticism, especially its comparison with atheism, and determine the differences between agnosticism and atheism. Let's define and explore the history of agnosticism. The word agnosticism comes from the Greek word agnostos, which means unknown, not knowing. The word origin allows us to translate agnosticism into Turkish as known imizism. However, defining this word as a term of philosophy of religion is not straightforward. The meaning of agnosticism varies from philosopher to philosopher and even from theologian to theologian. In particular, whether agnostics believe in God or not, and agnosticism in the face of questions about what is the difference between an agnostic and an atheist, there are at least two quite different meanings of the term. Alvin Plantinga draws attention to these different uses and defines the term in the first popular sense. In the popular first sense, one who does not believe in God is called an atheist, while one who neither believes nor disbelieves in God is called an agnostic. In the more technical second sense, agnosticism is the view that human reason lacks the capacity to justify the existence or non-existence of God. The first kind of agnosticism Plantinga refers to is the view that agnosticism is a kind of skepticism or indecision. The second kind of agnosticism is defined as not accepting the existence of God because there is not enough evidence for it. It is impossible to distinguish the second type of agnosticism from atheism as a belief. However, we will not address this issue here, as it will be fully explored in a later chapter. Agnosticism has two distinct meanings, and it is important to understand the fundamental differences between them. Many people do not have a judgment about the existence or non-existence of God, or they do not accept the existence of God because there is no evidence. Thomas Huxley, 1825-1895, a 19th century British biologist and thinker, introduced the term agnosticism as an ism into the philosophical literature. Huxley created the concept of agnosticism to express the opposite of Gnosticism. The term Gnosticism is derived from the Greek word for knowledge, wisdom. It is based on the words gnosis and gnostikos, which mean to achieve knowing. Gnostic traditions are certain that they possess the knowledge of the nature of reality necessary for salvation. Religions such as Sabianism, Manichaeism, and Hermeticism are undoubtedly Gnostic religions. Huxley coined the term agnosticism at the British Metaphysical Society in 1869. Huxley's definition of Gnosticism is broader than the above definition. Huxley defines Gnosticism as the claim to have certain knowledge about God, the universe, and destiny, in the sense that he uses the word metaphysics. This is evident when we examine his writings. He therefore asserts that not only the esoteric religions mentioned above, but also Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and all metaphysical teachings are also Gnostic. This is clear from his subsequent statements, "I am an agnostic," the opposite of a Gnostic as defined by church history. The church claims to know a great deal about things of which I am ignorant, and as luck would have it, the term caught on. Huxley also describes the process that led to his coining of the term agnosticism, and explains the special meaning he attributes to the term Gnosticism in this context. When I reached intellectual maturity, I decided to ask myself whether I was an atheist, a theist, or a pantheist, a materialist, or an idealist, a Christian, or an independent thinker. The more I learned and the more I thought, the less I was willing to answer that question. I finally came to this conclusion. The one thing that all these groups had in common was something I differed from. They had all achieved a certain gnosis and solved the problem of existence, and were therefore very confident in their abilities. I don't have that information, so I am almost certain that I cannot solve the problem of existence. I am also convinced that it is unsolvable. These were Huxley's thoughts at the time of his admission to the British Metaphysical Society. The association included people of all philosophical and theological views. Many of their fellow members of the association were of this or that view. Ist. As we have already quoted, Huxley did not believe that any philosophical or theological label was appropriate for him. It simply did not fit. That's why, he states emphatically, I took my own view and invented the word agnostic, because I knew it would be the most appropriate name for it. Huxley's agnosticism is defined as the belief that the existence of God and the truth of religious beliefs are unknowable, but I doubt this is the full extent of his definition. In fact, if it were limited to that, Huxleyan agnosticism, as defined, would not be so repulsive to many religious people and thinkers. Many religious people, and especially theologians, who have accepted one form or another of fideism, do not consider religious beliefs, especially the existence of God, to be the subject of knowledge. But at the same time, they see no problem in believing in these things that they do not see as the subject of knowledge. They argue that this is precisely the nature of religious faith, to believe in the unknown and invisible without doubting, to believe with a surrender of faith. This is where Huxleyan agnosticism differs radically from fideism. The agnostic, unlike the fideist, is clear that belief in unproven truths is both irrational and unethical. Huxley expresses this principle of his own agnosticism in the following words. Agnosticism is not a negative principle of belief. It can be taken as a basis of faith. He questions the validity of absolute faith based on an ethical and intellectual principle. This principle can be expressed in many ways, but it all comes down to this. If you have evidence that logically justifies being certain of the objective truth of a proposition, you can say with confidence that it is true. Otherwise, you cannot say that you are certain of the truth of that proposition. In another article, Huxley makes it clear that this principle has a practical consequence, clinging to unproven or unprovable conclusions as if they were absolute truth. Huxleyan agnosticism is distinct from fideism because the agnostic knows that truth is unknowable. Belief in the unknowable is not a rational attitude. The following statements by Huxley are relevant to his meaning of agnosticism and confirm our findings. If I am asked for the tenets of agnosticism, I must say that it has no tenets, and by its very nature, can never have any. In fact, agnosticism is a method, not a belief. At the heart of this method is a single unwavering commitment to the principle. The principle in question can be expressed in a positive manner. Use your intellect as far as it will take you. There's no need to consider anything else. In other words, it is. In matters where you need to use your intellect, don't cling to conclusions as if they were absolute truth. This is what I believe to be the agnostic's belief. If you hold this belief in full, you can go out in public without blushing, whatever the future has in store for you. A similar principle, this time of the ethics of faith, was put forward in more detail shortly after Huxley, in 1877, by William Clifford, 1845-1879. In his essay, the morality of belief, Clifford was unequivocal in his argument that actions and behaviors should be based on a moral principle, just as they should be based on principles. He defines this moral principle as, "It is always and everywhere wrong for everyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence." Huxley is not the first to coin the term agnosticism. In fact, agnostic thinkers existed before him. If we consider agnosticism as skepticism about religious beliefs, it is clear that this approach can be traced back to ancient times. In this context, the ancient Greek thinker Protagoras is undoubtedly the first agnostic thinker. He confidently stated his views on the existence of God. As for the gods, there is no way of knowing whether they exist or not. The sheer mystery of the question and the brevity of human life are among the many factors that prevent us from acquiring knowledge on this subject. In preparing the ground for agnostic thought in the modern period before Huxley, some philosophers were crucial. The most important of these are David Hume and Kant. That's another matter entirely. Both thinkers unequivocally questioned the possibility of metaphysical knowledge through their writings and forcefully argued that proofs of God's existence cannot be seen as evidence. In his seminal study on the origins of agnosticism, Bernard Lightman makes a compelling case for the pivotal role Kant played in shaping this philosophical movement. The 19th century saw the rise of numerous prominent agnostic thinkers. These include Herbert Spencer, William Hamilton, 1788-1856, Henry Longville Mansell, 1820-1871, from England, and Robert G. Ingersoll, 1833-1899, from America. In the 20th century, the logical positivists and Bertrand Russell were the most prominent agnostics. Types of agnosticism. As we previously stated, the definition of agnosticism differs from one philosopher to the next and one theologian to the next. The most important reason for this is that different types of agnosticism exist. Since philosophers have defined agnosticism by considering only one of these different types, different definitions of agnosticism have emerged. I believe that there is no correct definition of agnosticism without first clarifying its varieties. Without this, it will be impossible to distinguish it from atheism. Many philosophers who have written on agnosticism have described two types, weak and strong. Others, like William Rowe, speak of two types. They categorize agnosticism into three distinct types, weak, moderate, and strong. Furthermore, some use the term agnosticism in a broader context, dividing it into agnostic theism, agnostic atheism, indifferent agnosticism, and pragmatic agnosticism. The agnostic theism mentioned in these last classifications, like that of Kierkegaard and Kant, is a theism that holds that God's existence cannot be known. Agnostic theism is for people who know that we cannot know everything but still believe in God. Agnostic theism and religious agnosticism are two distinct concepts. Agnostic atheism is the belief in any belief without sufficient evidence. This includes the views of Thomas Huxley, William Clifford, and Bertrand Russell. The existence of God is based on the agnostic principle that God is not rational. It is the attitude of thinkers who do not find it rational to believe. As we will discuss later, this attitude is also called strong agnosticism or philosophical agnosticism. Indifferent agnosticism and pragmatic agnosticism are forms of weak agnosticism. In these types of agnosticism, there is a complete indifference and apathy to faith and religion. This attitude is also called apatheism, indifferentism. It is clear that the most appropriate classification of agnosticism is into weak and strong. This classification, with different names, includes all the other types mentioned, as well as a more epistemological point of view. It is appropriate. In terms of epistemological stance, his agnosticism is weak. It is more accurate and inclusive to group them under strong forms. Weak agnosticism. Many thinkers are wrong to speak of this form of agnosticism. Some philosophers have called the weak form of agnosticism the popular meaning of agnosticism. A weak agnostic is someone who believes neither in the existence nor the non-existence of God, but in both no judiciary or suspended judiciary. They are also in serious doubt about this issue. When Nicholas Everett says, "I use the term agnostic to refer to someone who thinks that the existence and non-existence of God are equally probable," he is actually referring to this weak form of agnosticism, although he does not name it. Kai Nielsen also accepts that religious people believe religious propositions such as "God is my creator" to be true. Some atheists judge them to be false, unlike this atheist who is talking about himself. There are also agnostics who have not reached a decision as to whether these propositions are true or false. Agnostics believe that religious claims must be either true or false. They do not believe that they decide one of the two sides. This is the same type of agnosticism. One might be forgiven for wondering whether there are people who believe in neither the existence nor the non-existence of God, who are undecided on this issue. This question is not just about astonishment and bewilderment. It is also about the possibility of such a person's existence. This also implies serious skepticism. There is no doubt about it. For a theist who believes in God and has surrendered to him, this kind of agnosticism is simply inconceivable. Tolstoy himself said it best. Religion is all about answering one question. I must know why I exist and what my relation is to this infinite universe that surrounds me. It is for this reason that the heart of man is bound to have a religion, i.e., any kind of relationship with the world. It is as inevitable as having a heart. Some people are unaware that they have a religion, just as others are unaware that they have a heart. But it is just as likely that someone will live without a heart as it is that they will live without religion. It is evident that Tolstoy considered an atheistic way of life, let alone an agnostic attitude, to be unfeasible. However, when this attitude is analyzed, it becomes clear that this perspective is based on an unshakable conviction and determination. From this firm conviction and determination, it is impossible to understand the agnostic's situation and frame of mind, or to empathize with him intellectually. We believe this type of agnosticism should be regarded as a state of indecision, confusion, or indifference in matters of faith. In fact, it is a condition of indecision, confusion, or indifference on any subject. This prevents them from reaching a judgment on that subject. The agnostic is left out. In a letter written by Charles Darwin to Mr. J. Fordyce in 1879, he succinctly and eloquently articulated the confusion and indecision inherent in weak agnosticism. My views on these matters are constantly changing. These fluctuations are not extreme enough to make an atheist of anyone. I often find that agnosticism is a better way to describe my state of mind, and this is becoming increasingly the case as I get older. I believe it is more appropriate. Atheists are wrong to treat agnosticism as ambivalence and confusion. They also criticize this aspect of agnosticism and see it as inadequate. Richard Dawkins, a staunch atheist, opens a special chapter on this subject in his book, The God Delusion. He discusses agnosticism from the perspective of atheism and criticizes it. In his chapter, The Misery of Agnosticism, Dawkins, like Plantinga and Rowe, states that there are two types of agnosticism. The first type of agnostic is someone who has not yet reached a judgment about God because they lack sufficient evidence. Dawkins calls this provisional agnosticism. This is what we call weak agnosticism. In the second type, an agnostic is someone who considers it impossible to gain any knowledge about God. Dawkins calls this kind of agnosticism permanent agnosticism, which we call here strong agnosticism. Dawkins is clear that agnosticism, in the sense of refusing to make a definitive judgment on matters about which there is ongoing debate and insufficient evidence, is an intelligent attitude. However, he makes it clear that the existence of God is not such a matter. This is because a definitive answer to the question of God's existence can be given from a scientific perspective. Therefore, he asserts that although temporary agnosticism may seem reasonable until we know the evidence for God's non-existence, neither the existence nor the non-existence of God can ever be known. This is beyond human capacity. Permanent agnosticism is not a wise position. This is a false assumption. Dawkins has made it clear that the probability of God's existence is not equal to the probability of God's non-existence. He confidently asserts that the evidence is mounting in favor of God's non-existence. He makes his case throughout the aforementioned book. Atheists are wrong to criticize the ambivalence of agnosticism as an inadequacy. This is not the case for thinkers who have adopted this form of agnosticism. To understand this kind of agnosticism, it is essential to consider how people who believe and proclaim their beliefs view life and think. Take Henry Cadbury, for instance. He was a Christian theologian and biblical commentator, but he openly declared himself to be agnostic. In 1936, he addressed students at Harvard Divinity School and said, "Many students are unaware of my beliefs. They do not know whether I believe in the existence of God or in the immortality of the soul. I don't believe in it, and he wants to know why. They want to discuss these matters. They can't leave them in the air without judgment. They also see it as extremely dangerous. I don't see any reason not to leave these issues unresolved. I understand that others may have different views. I don't consider myself either an enthusiastic theist or a committed atheist. I also avoid making definitive judgments. I am not an ardent partisan in any field, including theological questions. I believe it is possible to avoid such partisanship. My students were definitely not making a judgment. In my opinion, that's the best mental attitude. They know there are questions of history among them. Take, for instance, the question of which of the two letters of Paul to the Thessalonians in the New Testament was written first. Jorge Luis Borges, 1899-1986, an Argentine agnostic poet and literary figure, states, "To be agnostic means that everything is possible, including God and the Holy Trinity. This world is so strange that it is impossible for anything to happen, or it is possible that it is not. I have lived a long, wonderful, and totally enigmatic life thanks to my agnosticism. It has also made me more tolerant." He states that he is not afraid of dying and offers a description of what it feels like to be agnostic from the perspective of an agnostic. As we have seen, the weak form of agnosticism is simply a temporary indecision and confusion. It may seem confusing or like a permanent state of indecision or apathy, but it is neither. This kind of agnosticism has no philosophical value whatsoever. This is a state of temporary indecision or permanent indifference, and there is no epistemological justification for it. W. Rowe also states that weak agnosticism as a philosophical position does not need to be defended. This is a clear and direct assertion that weak agnosticism is not a position that requires justification. This kind of agnosticism can also take the form of atheism, a complete indifference to religious matters and to God. However, there is a clear epistemological decision to refrain from making a final judgment about God. This is done in order to try to philosophically justify weak agnosticism by staunchly defending this ambivalence. Anthony Kenny is an advocate of this kind of agnosticism. He is the author of the definitive text on the subject, What I Believe. He states, "The right attitude to have is neither theism nor atheism, but rather agnosticism." He then defines agnosticism as the attitude that one does not know whether God exists or not. For Kenny, the fundamental and decisive question in the debate on the rationality of theism is whether belief in God's existence can be justified. This depends on whether the evidence for God's existence is valid. Kenny justifies his weak agnostic stance on the existence of God as follows. "I am unaware of any convincing arguments in favor of God's existence. I can find holes in all of them. I am unaware of any compelling evidence that disproves the existence of God. I can also find flaws in the evidence that has been presented. I am therefore an agnostic in my personal position on the existence of God." Kenny defines an agnostic as someone who does not know whether God exists and whether the concept of God is coherent. He believes that both theists and atheists are not skeptical enough. Kenny is right to say that theists and atheists are both naive because they cannot justify their beliefs and do not see their epistemological stance as rational. The only rational stance on the issue of God's existence is the one that avoids final judgment. Kenny's position on this issue is as follows. A claim to knowledge requires justification, but ignorance needs nothing more than a confession. Kenny rejects both theistic and atheistic positions as equally dogmatic. This form of agnosticism appeals to its adherents because it is the only view that is free from dogmatism. However, the view that agnosticism is dogmatism-free is controversial. As I noted in the introduction, this debate is the subject of another account and will not be addressed here. Strong agnosticism. Strong agnosticism is also known as philosophical agnosticism. As stated above, a person who advocates a strong form of agnosticism not only asserts that they do not have evidence for God's existence, but also argues that such evidence is not available to anyone. They believe that no one has the possibility of knowing that God exists, and therefore theism cannot be rationally justified. Thomas Huxley, the inventor of the term agnosticism, is a staunch proponent of agnosticism. In a statement we quoted earlier, he was unequivocal. "I am almost certain that I have no such knowledge and that I cannot solve the problem of existence. I am also convinced that this problem is unsolvable." Many famous people, including William Clifford, Bertrand Russell, and Robert Ingersoll, were undoubtedly strong agnostics. It is evident that the agnosticism under philosophical scrutiny is predominantly strong agnosticism. Bertrand Russell was unequivocal in his assertion that the agnostic is an agnostic who believes that it is impossible, or, if not impossible, at least impossible, to know such things as God and the afterlife. This is a strong form of agnosticism. The agnostic does not just say, "I don't know." He goes one step further, stating emphatically, "You don't know either." Robert Ingersoll's words express a strong form of agnosticism. George Lincoln Rockwell, the American writer and politician, uses agnosticism in a strong sense in his autobiography when explaining his view on religious beliefs. "I am an agnostic, and by that, I mean that I have no idea about the mystery of life and eternity. In the face of all the suggestions and explanations put forward, I state categorically that I don't know, and I don't believe that any other human being can know." The stronger form of agnosticism is not characterized by indecision and lack of judgment. In contrast, it has a clear and structured approach to the unknowability of religious matters. Agnosticism is distinct from atheism. Without considering the various forms of agnosticism and atheism, it is incorrect to directly contrast the two by making a comparison. Our analyses have revealed two distinct forms of agnosticism. When these attitudes are analyzed in terms of their relationship with atheism, their differences become even more apparent. It is essential to consider and evaluate weak and strong agnosticism separately in terms of their relationship with atheism. The weak form of agnosticism directly contrasts with atheism. An atheist is someone who does not believe in God and denies the existence of God. An agnostic in this form is someone who has suspended their view and belief in God. The weak form of agnosticism also contrasts with theism. It is evident that the theist believes in God and has no doubts about it. In contrast, the agnostic in his weak form has no belief in God and is unable to make a judgment due to a lack of certainty. The relationship between strong agnosticism and atheism is completely different. In the weak sense of agnosticism, the issue is whether or not one believes in God. In strong agnosticism, there is no such situation. Strong agnosticism is about the limits of human knowledge. It is an epistemological attitude. This attitude is based on the principle that one should not believe in what one does not know or what one does not have evidence about. Strong agnosticism is essentially no different from atheism in practice, as it also entails a lack of belief in God. Strong agnostics are clear that they do not believe in God or religion. Robert Ingersoll, the famous American agnostic mentioned above, wrote in his essay, "Why Am I an Agnostic?" that he asked himself a question. Is there a supernatural power, an uncaused spirit, a supreme being, a supernatural power that directs the course of the world and to which all causes are subordinate? There is a God. There is a universal will. I'm not denying it. I don't know, but I don't believe. We can be honest in not knowing. If so, then when we are asked what lies beyond the limit of what is known, we must say, I don't know. Strong agnostics, however, refuse to identify themselves as atheists. This is because they have a reason for not believing in God. They say that atheists not only don't believe in God, but are certain that he doesn't exist, and even have proof of it. However, both the weak and strong forms of agnosticism state that God's non-existence and his existence cannot be proven or known. Therefore, while the atheist does not believe in God because there is evidence for his non-existence, the agnostic does not believe in God because he thinks that no knowledge can be obtained on this subject. This is a very philosophical distinction, and the terms agnostic and atheist are used as purely philosophical, technical terms. It is crucial to understand that the way these terms are used in popular culture can be misleading at this point. In popular usage, anyone who does not believe in God is called an atheist. Once more, a religious theist would call anyone who does not believe in God an atheist and characterize them as such. It is crucial to consider the popular interpretation of these terms. The ordinary person would see no difference between an atheist and a strong agnostic. However, agnostics believe there are significant and fundamental differences between them and atheists when the distinction is viewed philosophically. The following statements by Bertrand Russell, one of the first and most prominent philosophers of strong agnosticism, clearly express these observations. As a philosopher, I identify myself as an agnostic when speaking to an audience of fellow philosophers. I am an agnostic because I don't think there is a strong enough argument to prove that God does not exist. I am an atheist. I cannot prove that God does not exist, and I cannot prove that the gods of Greek mythology do not exist either. Russell asserts that atheists and theists alike agree that it is possible to know whether God exists or not. Theists believe they can know that God exists. Atheists, on the other hand, say that they can know that God does not exist. Russell, an advocate of strong agnosticism, asserts that an agnostic is someone who can accept or reject the existence of God. There is simply not enough evidence for the existence of God, which sets him apart from both positions. However, the agnostic differs from the atheist in that they believe God's existence is possible, but see it as highly improbable, unlike the theist. He doesn't believe in God because there's no evidence for it. This last characteristic makes the agnostic closer to an atheist. Russell is clear that the agnostic stance is a result of the lack of evidence to support the existence of ancient Greek deities like Zeus, Hera, and Poseidon. This is the same as the attitude of someone who doesn't believe in them. Ask an unbeliever how they know that gods don't exist, and they'll be unable to provide proof. They'll say they don't know that gods don't exist. However, he will still not believe in them since he considers it unlikely that they exist. Russell is clear that an agnostic does not believe in God because they see God's existence as just as probable as the existence of the ancient Greek gods. In short, Russell asserts that an agnostic behaves and believes like an atheist, but justifies their stance differently. This leads them to deny and be skeptical about atheism. Russell's analysis of the epistemological difference between atheism and agnosticism is definitive. However, a closer look at this distinction reveals a number of difficulties and even errors. Firstly, it is evident that Russell considers only the strong sense of agnosticism and not the weak sense. He virtually ignored agnosticism. He also dismissed atheism. He uses atheism in a certain sense but ignores different types of atheism. Other philosophers who analyze the distinction between atheism and agnosticism emphasize the need to pay attention to different types of atheism. In this context, Antony Flew distinguishes between strong and weak forms of atheism by calling them positive atheism and negative atheism, and agnosticism. Flew positions agnosticism accordingly. Flew defines a positive atheist as someone who explicitly denies the existence of God. The prefix "a" in the term atheist makes it clear that this is a term that contrasts with something else. A theist is someone who openly acknowledges the existence of God and is certain of it. In other words, an atheist in this positive sense is a person who does not accept the existence of God and is certain of his non-existence. Flew is clear that the prefix "a" in the term atheist means opposition. It is not just something, as in amoral, asymmetrical, or asocial. It is someone who is not. Let me be clear, an atheist is not someone who positively denies the existence of God or argues for his non-existence. They are simply a theist who is not. Flew refers to the second meaning of the term as negative atheism. Flew distinguishes agnosticism from positive and negative atheism. He is clear that an agnostic is someone who cannot know whether there is a God or not, and that the concept of God itself is valid and meaningful. Flew asserts that there is no reason for negative atheists to think this way. In fact, Flew asserts that anyone who has never heard of God or met the concept is also a negative atheist. Flew was clear that agnosticism is the belief that it is sensible to say that God exists, whereas atheism, at least in its negative form, does not entail the belief that the concept of God is sensible. Kenny is right to point out that even if Flew's distinction between positive and negative atheism is accepted, what he says about agnosticism cannot be accepted as true. This is because agnosticism is the basis of agnosticism. This agnosticism includes the idea that God exists. The concept of God can be meaningful or not. It is simply not realistic to suggest that agnostics should believe that the concept of God is meaningful. Kenny confidently redefines and classifies theism, atheism, and agnosticism from his point of view. He divides theism into two, calling them positive and negative theism. Those who adhere to positive theism accept the existence of God wholeheartedly. Negative theism is simply not atheism. Kenny is a perfect example of Flu's distinction between positive and negative atheism. He also accepts the meanings that agnosticism gives to these terms and redefines its relation to them. For him, an agnostic is not someone who believes that the concept of God is coherent. They are simply someone who does not know it. I am a negative theist. Kenny's definition of a negative theist and an atheist as agnostic is clear. It is clear that Kenny's distinctions regarding agnosticism take into account the positive and negative forms of atheism and theism in a more nuanced way than Russell's. This approach leads to the clear identification of 5 distinct concepts. There are 5 distinct forms of belief: positive theism, negative theism, positive atheism, negative atheism, and agnosticism. Kenny failed to take into account the strong and weak forms of agnosticism when making his distinctions. He only considered the weak form of agnosticism and made his classifications accordingly. We believe that Kenny's approach is incomplete. This is with regard to the aspect of theism. By dividing agnosticism into strong and weak forms, we have identified 6 distinct philosophical concepts. There are 6 different philosophical concepts: positive theism, negative theism, positive atheism, negative atheism, strong agnosticism, and weak agnosticism. Let us now address the question at hand. There are 6 different concepts that correspond to the 6 different stances and attitudes. Do different stances and attitudes really exist? Kenny's analysis provides part of the answer to this question. He confidently asserted that negative theism and negative atheism can be equated with agnosticism. Kenny asserts that despite the 6 different concepts of God, there are really only 3 positions regarding the existence of God. Positive theism, there are 3 positions regarding the existence of God. Positive theism, God's existence and belief in it without doubt. Positive atheism, absolute denial of God's existence or doubt about God's non-existence. Agnosticism, it is simply a state of ignorance, non-judgment, and undecidedness about the existence or non-existence of God. Kenny is clear that this type of agnosticism, which we have already mentioned is weak agnosticism, is the same as negative theism and negative atheism. It is an attitude. Kenny's analysis reveals 2 indisputable facts. Firstly, it is crucial to understand that agnosticism is a completely different attitude to positive atheism and positive theism. Secondly, it is perfectly straightforward to distinguish weak agnosticism from negative theism and negative atheism. Kenny is a weak agnostic himself. He has always approached the issue from this perspective. He has not analyzed the issue in terms of strong agnosticism. We must ask ourselves whether strong agnosticism is the same as negative theism or negative atheism. Once more, let us consider negative theism and atheism. Is it accurate to view them as the same as a weak form of agnosticism? This question forces us to think more deeply about these concepts and analyze them further. It is clear that many people who identify as theists, atheists, or agnostics do not take these subtle distinctions into account. I am certain that they do not. That's why they don't define themselves accurately. In other words, some people who call themselves agnostics are actually atheists, and some people who call themselves atheists are actually agnostics. In any case, the credibility of their reasoning and judgments depends on the importance and clarity of these distinctions for philosophers who talk about and analyze concepts. These distinctions are necessary for philosophical inquiry. Ordinary people may not dwell on these distinctions and may even find them unnecessary. However, a healthy philosophical inquiry requires clarity and precision, and these distinctions are essential for that. It is therefore the primary task of philosophy and the philosopher to clarify these distinctions. Once these distinctions have been made, agnosticism can be reassigned to the differences between theism and atheism. We will be back. We will now address the question of the authenticity of the 6 different attitudes that emerge from the 2 forms of theism, atheism, and agnosticism. We believe this question is dependent on how it is approached and what questions are asked. For example, if we examine the issue solely in terms of belief and disbelief and categorize people into 2 groups, believers and non-believers, we end up with a very simplistic view of the world. From this perspective, there is no distinction between an atheist and an agnostic. This is like grouping all colors into 2 colors, dark and light. Such an approach is, however, extremely superficial. and ignores the diversity in nature and the individual authenticity of the colors of objects. Let's find out how people feel about the existence of God and how they feel religiously. Let's imagine we're conducting a survey to find out how people define God. If we change the question from, "Do you believe in God or not?" to, "Do you believe in God or not?" we can clearly see that the answers will vary. For example, if we replace the terms believing, non-believing with denying, non-denying, and ask people the same question, we can see that the answers will vary. Some people who say they don't believe will find it difficult to admit that they are in denial. Denial is a positive attitude and requires a determined stance. It is therefore necessary to adopt a dogmatic perspective. That's why some atheists who say they don't believe in God are not willing to justify its non-existence. This is what we call atheism, negative atheism. Conversely, an atheist who is unwavering in their beliefs and dogmatic in their stance can effortlessly assert that they do not believe in God while simultaneously denying its existence. Once more, we can be sure that the results will change when we ask the question as knowing, not knowing God's existence. Those who are unsure whether they believe in God or not will not be able to say, "I know that God exists, I am sure of it." A similar situation applies to theism. Those who believe in God are different from those who do not. A positive theist is someone who wholeheartedly believes in God without any doubt. This person unequivocally rejects atheism as an option. However, there are also theists whose mental state of mind is not so clear. They deny God, but they are not atheists. However, their affirmation of God is also weak and indistinct. One could say that negative theism and negative atheism are very similar, and the line between them is blurred. This line can be overcome very easily in time. When we add the terms believing and denying to the question, we can clearly differentiate between God attitudes. Adding knowing, having knowledge, as a third term to the question makes it clear that human attitudes are differentiated. There is a clear increase in attitudes towards God in relation to the relationship between knowing and believing combinations. Believers believe they know. They believe this knowledge source can be reason or revelation. It doesn't matter. These are positive theists. Those who deny because they think they know are positive atheists. Those who do not disbelieve because they think they do not know are negative theists. Those who neither believe nor disbelieve because they think they don't know are negative atheists. Those who deny because they think they do not know are weak agnostics. Those who deny because they think they do not know are strong agnostics. In light of what we have said, the characteristics of these 6 groups can be summarized in the following table. This table clearly shows that there is a very small difference between negative theism, negative atheism, and weak agnosticism, as Kenny correctly states. Sometimes this difference even disappears completely. However, strong agnosticism is more akin to positive atheism than negative atheism in terms of belief, non-belief. Both are forms of disbelief. This is also a form of positive atheism. Some even call strong agnosticism agnostic atheism. Strong agnosticism differs from positive atheism on 2 important points, as our table clearly shows. Firstly, the positive atheist states that they do not believe because they know that God does not exist. In contrast, the strong agnostic does not believe because they do not know whether God exists or not. Put simply, the first one, atheist, adheres to the epistemological principle of "I don't believe because I know," while the second, agnostic, as exemplified by Russell, acts on the epistemological principle of "I don't believe because I don't know." This clearly demonstrates an important difference between their reasons for disbelief. This crucial distinction also shapes how the strong agnostic and the positive atheist approach the question of God's non-existence. The positive atheist is certain of God's non-existence. The strong agnostic is not sure of God's existence, nor is he sure of God's non-existence. He thinks he doesn't have knowledge of this. He does not believe in God because he has no knowledge about it, and believes it is not appropriate to believe in something you have no knowledge about. This is a crucial distinction between strong agnosticism and positive atheism. Let's answer the questions we posed earlier. What if we define strong agnosticism as negative theism or negative atheism? And how accurate is it to see negative theism and atheism as the same as the weak form of agnosticism? We can now answer both of these questions. Our analyses show that it is incorrect to equate strong agnosticism with negative theism and atheism. As we mentioned above, strong agnosticism is more similar to positive atheism. In answer to the second question, we believe that although weak agnosticism as a mental attitude is difficult to distinguish from negative theism and negative atheism in many cases, there are still small differences between them. The negative theist and the negative atheist are on the same line in terms of not denying God's existence. However, the negative theist has a weak assent, and the negative atheist has a weak disbelief. This weak assent and weak disbelief is what distinguishes them from each other and also distinguishes them from weak agnosticism. Weak agnosticism is also a complete lack of judgment. There is a state of affirmation or disbelief, even a weak one. Weak agnosticism is a state of indecision. This is what sets it apart from negative theism and negative atheism.
We offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications.